Good morning, good afternoon, or good night, and welcome to Command Power, the show in which we discuss all things Magic the Gathering with a focus on Commander. And today we have a brand new deck tech for you from the new set Phyrexia All Will Be One. And just a quick heads up, this is not a budget deck tech, so there are going to be some expensive cards in there, although I think it shouldn't be too hard to find substitutions for those expensive cards. But before we do that, just a quick reminder to please click subscribe if you enjoy these videos. It's the only way the YouTube algorithm really notices me, and we're currently growing the channel, and it helps me a lot. Much appreciated. And today we're going to be talking about Ria Ivor, Bane of Bladehold. Now, if you don't know what Ria Ivor does, this is one of the coolest commanders to come out of Phyrexia All Will Be One, and for 2 colorless, 1 white and 1 black, it's a 3/4 legendary creature Phyrexian Knight with Battle Cry, and at the beginning of combat on your turn, the next time target creature would deal combat damage to 1 or more players this combat, prevent that damage. If damage is prevented this way, create that many 1/1 colorless Phyrexian Might artifact creature tokens with Toxic 1, and this creature can't block. So this is a super unique card that asks you to build a very weird deck around it. Now, it's a throwback to the old hero of Bladehold, which has become Phyrexianized. That's why it's a 4 mana 3/4 with Battle Cry, but the ability is much different this time. What it's asking you to do is basically select one of your creatures that everybody knows about as you're attacking, and then if it gets through for damage, instead of dealing damage, it's going to create that many Phyrexian Mights. So there's a few different things that we can build around here. Obviously, we need a few ways to make our creatures unblockable. That's kind of important, and we want creatures that have a little bit of evasion to start off with so that we can get through for damage and deal enough damage that we can make a bunch of creatures with this ability. And once we do that, we can have a little bit of token synergy, we can have a little bit of artifact synergy because the tokens that it makes are in fact artifacts, and obviously there's a lot of cards that work very well with 1/1s. We can sacrifice them, we can wait for them to die to deal damage. There's all sorts of different things that we can use them for. So I think it's a really cool build around Commander, and there's a bunch of ways that you can build it. I'm not saying my way is the best, but here it is. Starting off, we have Adeline Resplendent Cathar. She is a really awesome one because she has Vigilance, and since she's going to make a bunch of tokens, she's going to have really high power, which means she's a good one to use with Ria Ivor's ability to deal a ton of damage, thus making a bunch more tokens. It kind of feeds off the deck very well. Next up, we have Aaron, Benalia's Ruin. Now, usually I think this is a pretty mid card, but since we're making so many tokens, we can actually sacrifice them easily and make all of our mights into a bigger threat, which is quite nice. It also has Menace, which means that early on we can use this to get through with Ria Ivor's ability. Benny Brack's Zoologist is a staple in any tokens deck. It's going to draw us cards. Blood Artist is great with all the tokens we're going to be making, because if they block them, they're taking damage and we're draining, and if they don't block them, they're getting toxic and probably going to die pretty soon. So both of those modes suit us just fine. Bronze Guardian is going to be solid with the Ward 2, and it's also going to give Ward 2 to all of our other artifacts, which is nice, but crucially, it has a really big power due to all the artifacts that we're presumably going to control. And the double strike works interestingly with Ria Ivor's ability. If I'm not wrong, the first strike damage will be prevented, but the double strike damage will go through as normal. Next up, we have Chittering Skitterling, which is a really sweet one in this deck. Corrupted is very likely to be on by the time we need it, and then we're going to have so many tokens that we can sacrifice to this so that it can draw us 3 or 4 cards per turn cycle, which is great. Commissar Severina Rain is going to be great as a mid to late game card since the ability hits all opponents. It's a great way to finish the game. It also gives us a nice little sack outlet for all those little tokens, so if they get blocked, we can just sack them to gain some life and draw a card. Company Commander is going to create some nice tokens when it comes into the battlefield. We're okay with that, but what we really want it for is for the fact that it's going to give Death Touch to all of our creatures when they attack. That makes blocking those mites a real pain. Corpse Knight is going to make our opponents take a ton of damage whenever we activate Ria Ivor's ability. Cruel Celebrant is another card which gives our opponents an unfortunate choice of blocking our creatures and taking damage, or not blocking them and taking damage. Death Tyrant is a card that I really like in attacking decks, and it's particularly good in a deck with a lot of small creatures like this one, because if they block, we're probably going to get tokens, and if they don't block, we're going to get through for damage, and then it also works on our opponents. So whenever one of their blocking creatures dies, even if it's not our creatures that killed it, we're still going to get a 2/2 zombie. This just works really well, and it's also really difficult to kill and has Menace, so it works very well with Ria Ivor. Drivnod Carnage Dominus is going to double all of our death triggers. We have quite a lot in this deck. Ellis Ilkor Sadistic Pilgrim is a great one to gain us some life and make our opponents lose some life. Edge Champion I really like in this deck. It can get through very easily because we have so many artifacts, which means it's essentially unblockable, but we can still equip it with our equipment to boost its power, so it should be pretty solid. Gix Yawgmoth Praetor is going to draw us a ton of cards when we have our mites out. It's also going to encourage our opponents to attack each other, which we like. Loshiel Clockwork Scholar is going to protect our mites when they get through, and it's also going to draw us a card every turn we make mites, which is pretty solid. Do bear in mind that sometimes the correct play is to not play this if you want your creatures to die so you can get the death triggers off of them. Marionette Master is a great way to finish the game. Late in the game, this can just deal absolutely tons of damage to our opponent and means that they can't afford to block our mites, but they also can't afford to not block them. Mentor of the Meek is a nice way to draw some cards whenever we have spare mana available. Mondrak Glory Dominus is going to double up all of our tokens. It is a super expensive card, but it's just that good. Norn's Choirmaster does two things the deck needs. It's evasive and gets in for a lot of damage, which works very well with Ria Ivor, and then it's also going to proliferate whenever our commander attacks or enters the battlefield. We're probably going to have poison counters on our opponents, so proliferating is a big deal. Prava of the Steel Legion is going to buff up all of our tokens, which is going to make them a lot harder to die during our turn. Rumor Gatherer is going to scry whenever a creature comes into the battlefield under our control for the first time each turn, and the second time it's going to draw us a card, and then it's going to keep scrying. So we're probably going to be making a bunch of tokens every turn. This is going to basically draw us a card every turn and scry a bunch. Skrelv Defector Might is a great way to give our creatures evasion and protection, so it's a great way to get through something to use it with Ria Ivor's ability. Sun Titan is just great late game staying potential. It can reanimate stuff from the graveyard, which is solid. Suture Priest is going to boost our life total and also take away from our opponents. Pacer Karloff is going to work really well with all of the death triggers we've got going on in the deck, and it's also going to give all of our tokens vigilance and lifelink, which is nice. Talise Reverent Medium is going to give us a bunch of tokens. Basically, it's going to double any amount of tokens we create, except they're flyers, which is really nice. Viscera Seer is just a staple as a sacrifice outlet that we can use for free, and Zulaport Cutthroat is another way for us to drain our opponents whenever our creatures die. For artifacts, we've got Cranial Plating. With all the tokens we have, this is going to deal a ton of damage, and since we can move it around at instant speed, it is really solid. Eldrazi Monument makes sure that our creatures are immune to board wipes, and it makes all of our mites into evasive threats. Idol of Oblivion is going to draw us an extra card every turn. Infested Flesh Cutter is surprisingly good, even though it doesn't do anything particularly exciting. We are getting a token with it every turn, and the power boost that we get works really well with Ria Ivor. Nettle's Cyst is going to give a huge power boost to one creature, which again works very well with our commander. Nor's Wellspring is on the weaker side of things, but it's still going to scry and draw us some cards, which is nice. Skull Clamp is going to be fantastic in this deck with all the 1/1 tokens we're making. Staff of Completion is about as good in this deck as in any other deck right now, which I think is fantastic. We have a lot of ways to gain life as well to offset the life loss, but proliferating and drawing a card and doing all of those things is just really good. Swiftfoot Boots is a nice way to protect our commander or any of our big threats. Throne of Geth can sacrifice one of our tokens every turn to proliferate, so as long as we've got one poison in, this is going to finish the game pretty quick. Trailblazer's Boots is one of the best ways to guarantee that our creatures can get through, since pretty much every deck has non-basic lands. Vat of Rebirth is going to get a lot of counters since our tokens are probably going to die pretty easily, and we're also proliferating, so this should be very solid. And Whisper Silk Cloak is another way to give one of our creatures protection. It doesn't work very well with our commander because we can't target whatever's equipped with it, but it's a good thing to put on our commander so that we can freely use her battle cry without worrying about her dying. Next up, we're moving on to instants. We have Charge of the Mites, which is going to deal damage to something equal to the number of creatures we control, or create 2 mites at instant speed. Both of those are really good in this deck. Clever Concealment is often going to be free with all of those tokens we got lying around, so this is going to be a really solid card. Dispatch is basically unconditional removal in this deck since we have so many artifacts. Plumb the Forbidden is going to work super well as a way to sacrifice a bunch of creatures and draw a bunch of cards for only 2 mana. Using this in response to a board wipe feels absolutely broken. Rootborn Defenses is great board wipe protection that's also going to give us another creature. And Vraska's Fall is a great piece of removal in this deck because it's going to deal with 3 permanents from our opponents and give out 3 poison counters. Great value. Moving on to sorceries, we have Infectious Inquiry, which is a little bit below rate, but again, giving a poison counter is really good. Minions Murmurs is going to draw us a ton of cards with all the creatures we got going in this deck. Sometimes we do have to be careful with the amount of damage we take with this, but it should be pretty good. Phyresis Outbreak should probably be a one-sided board wipe in this deck, which is fantastic. Rite of Oblivion is basically unconditional removal that we can use twice in this deck. And Terracier's Devastation is going to be really solid. We can actually create a bunch of artifact tokens that work with a lot of the activated abilities we've got in this deck, but even without that, we have so many artifacts that this is basically going to be a really good board wipe. For enchantments, we've got Anointed Procession to double up all of our tokens. Bastion of Remembrance is going to give us more death triggers to make sure it's difficult for our opponents to deal with our tokens. Cathar's Crusade is one of the best finishes we can have since it's going to grow our board insanely every time it happens. Etchings of the Chosen gives a boost to all of our mites and then gives us a nice little bit of board wipe protection for our important creatures. We can just sacrifice the mites to save our important stuff. And Skrelv's Hive is going to give us an extra mite every turn, and it's also going to give our mites lifelink late in the game, which is really important. Finally, for Planeswalkers, we have Kaya, Geist Hunter. We're basically playing this so that we can use her -2 ability. We're probably only going to get to do it once, but doing it once feels good enough. And also, the +1 isn't even that bad. Giving everything Death Touch can be pretty annoying, and putting a counter on something means that we can proliferate later. Finally, we've got our lands. We have Access Tunnel to make sure that one of our creatures gets through, but Jukabog is going to deal with one of our opponent's graveyards. Hall of the Bandit Lord can make sure that a big creature has haste, including our commander, so that it can immediately use Ria Ivor's ability. Khan's Bastion is there to proliferate late game. This can actually win us the game out of nowhere. Rogue's Passage is another way to get one of our creatures through. Same with Shizo Death Storehouse. It's only going to work with legendaries, but that's enough. We have a few legendaries in the deck, and getting them through feels pretty good. Vault of the Archangel is fantastic in any white-black deck, particularly one running a bunch of small creatures that want to be attacking. So there you have it. That has been our Ria Ivor Bane of Bladehold deck tech. What do you think? Are there any things you would change? Any additions that you think I missed? Please let me know in the comments section below. I read all comments and respond to all of them too. And if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to click like or subscribe. It really helps the channel. And until next time, take care. Woo!